All right, Numsa spokesperson Phakamile Hlubi-Majola joins us now for more on this. Phakamile, good to have you, and thank you very much for your time. It opened at 15%, Eskom at 3.75%, Solidarity at 10.1%, moved a bit to about 11%, and Eskom went to about 4.5, 5.25, but it's ending at 7%. One would say you didn't get what you initially went in for. I suppose they also didn't get what they were initially offering. It's a win-win situation in a sense. How did you get here?
Good evening, and good evening to your listeners. Thank you so much, Thabo. I appreciate that you're having me on the show. Please forgive me, I'm just, my power just went off a minute ago. I hope you can see me and hear me clearly.
Quite ironic, as we're talking about Eskom and your power just went off, isn't it?
Yes, but in relation to your question, I think we must first of all remember that negotiations are a give and take. And even though Numsa did have a double-digit increase in mind as part of the demand, we are always cognizant of the fact that at some point we will have to compromise. And ultimately, what we can say is that where we have compromised, where we are right now in terms of this agreement that we've signed, we can comfortably say that this is agreement that was reached for the benefit of all parties. We can comfortably say that this agreement is one that is welcomed by the majority of all members, and this would include not just as Numsa, but also other unions as well.
Yeah, you avoided, of course, what we saw last year, which was a little bit of protests, others would have said unlawful protests that would have made things a little bit unstable at Eskom. You managed to start in April and finished it in June. I think you yourself as unions are pleased with the fact that it didn't go over that particular period.
Yes, we are very pleased. We are very pleased with the fact that we didn't find ourselves suddenly dealing with the same situation that we found ourselves in last year. We were actually working tirelessly to ensure that we resolve these wage talks without incident. Yeah. We, at the end of the day, it's not to anyone's benefit. If you notice, Thabo, it's a multi-year agreement. It's not just a one-year agreement. And by the way, this was something that Numsa pushed for, because at the end of the day, what we're trying to create is labor stability. It is in our interests for all of us to be focused on the maintenance of power stations and ensuring that we don't have a grid collapse. And even the Eskom executive, Mr. Kasim, who is the CFO, acknowledged that this time around it was very important for Eskom to ensure that all parties are on board so that we can all work together. And we do feel that if you consider the spirit of the negotiations, the fact that we were not swimming upstream like we were last year, we had an Eskom that was actually listening and engaging in a meaningful way. It really helped for us to get to the point where we could secure this and do it before the end of this month, which is when this agreement lapses.
There's some labor analysts who have said you were holding not only Eskom but the nation at ransom, considering, of course, we have been battling stage 8 load shedding for a while, which could have, I suppose, made the negotiations a little bit easier on your side.
Yes, indeed. I think, first of all, I don't know if we agree with the term holding the nation at ransom, in the sense that it's almost as if it's workers at Eskom who are to blame for load shedding. I think if the very same analysts had actually been listening to us from the time that Andre de Ruyter, in fact, even from the time that Phakamile Hlubi-Majola was appointed, Numsa and Labour has been very consistent that we needed a GCEO who understood Eskom and understood the fundamentals of maintaining power stations and ensuring high levels of energy availability factor. But because this ANC government wanted to deal with labor, they hired a clueless person like Andre de Ruyter, who was a lawyer and not an engineer and knew nothing about Eskom, and had him lead a critical entity whose survival literally dictates the economic performance of this country. And unfortunately for them, that choice actually backfired on them terribly. And now we are stuck with extremely high levels of load shedding because labor was ignored. Andre de Ruyter was given and was lauded and celebrated and supported even by the state, and yet he is part of the reason why we're here. So we hope going forward that when Eskom makes its final decision about who the GCO is, that they will take very seriously what Numsa and other unions have been saying. The same way that you wouldn't use a lawyer to operate on your brain if you needed brain surgery, you need a specialist. Eskom requires a specialist to lead it. And we hope that when they make that decision, they bear that in mind. That person doesn't have 18 months to figure out the job. They better hit the ground running, because at the end of the day, we're all suffering as a result of that poor choice.
Yeah. What do you make of the board chairperson saying, well, what we are seeing now as an improvement, at least, I mean, we're still under load shedding, but it's not as severe as one would have thought it would be, was because of the firing of the group CEO and I think the CFO as well?
I think maybe he meant the COO.
The COO, I beg your pardon. It must be me that is mixing them up. Yeah. Oberholzer leaving. Well, he wasn't really fired. He was coming, I suppose, to the end of his time at Eskom.
Oh, we definitely support that, because that is consistent with what we've been saying. At the helm of Eskom, the CEO's job is to actually drive a proper maintenance strategy. It's part of their key performance indicators. And I hope that finally people are starting to accept that this is something that must be taken serious. And we're glad that the board is echoing our sentiments. And we hope that when that this choice is made, that it will be the right person. I think at the end of the day, I mean, even if you look at what happened last year, the Ruyter wasn't just clueless when it came to dealing with energy availability factor. He actually almost destroyed centralized bargaining single-handedly, which is why you saw the pickets and the protests that took place last year. His absence at the talks this year was literally like a breath of fresh air. Because we were really able to make serious progress and to find one another on all the fundamental issues so that we could get to the point where we signed today.
Let's talk about those fundamental issues. What are the revised offers on the other demands, which one, I suppose, would think are quite key? Housing allowance. Initially, the talk was to raise it to 7,000 and allow workers to build anywhere in the country. Medical aid, also requiring a shift there to 80% and only 20% contribution from employees. Another one that could be quite significant was the 20,000 rand study benefit per child, and maybe the car allowance and the performance bonus. Did you manage to get any of those?
Okay, some of what you're reading there are NUM's demands. So I think let me just take you through what we signed on and what are some of the outstanding issues. In terms of what we signed on a 3-year agreement at 7% for each year. We also signed on a 7% increase for housing allowance. The housing allowance will increase by 7% for each year of the 3-year agreement. We also agreed that workers would receive a once-off 10,000 rand bonus, which will be paid to them, obviously in line with Eskom's remuneration principles, and that they would get another 10,000 rand taxable amount to be paid out again in the second year. So that was the sweetener for this agreement. And then in terms of the outstanding issues, it has to do with there are certain issues which have been relegated to be dealt with over the next 12 months. And we will be dealing with those within that period. And it does touch on some of the other demands. For example, when we talk about the wave differentials, that is something that Eskom actually agreed to in previous wage negotiations. So it's really about us trying in the next 12 months through these engagements that we're going to have to find ways to get them to implement it. And to implement it in a way that would obviously work for all parties. But certainly, yes, there are some issues that we will be dealing with over the next 12 months.
A quick one, what I wanted to get a view on from you as well was the presentation by Denel at Scopa yesterday. It seems Denel saying that they are now in the black. But speaking to the DA, it seems they took some money from the medical benefit and that's what they've been using. So it's not necessarily that they've been doing well. What's the view of the union?
I think on the issue of Denel, I must say that we are coming from a very difficult past with Denel. We still have to establish whether we are out of the woods. I think on Denel we will be issuing a more comprehensive statement in response to some of the latest issues that were raised certainly in Parliament. And that's when you and I can have a detailed discussion unpacking that as well.
All right, fantastic. Phakamile Hlubi-Majola, appreciate your time. Thanks so much for coming on tonight. That is Numsa spokesperson there, Phakamile Hlubi-Majola.